Yes, it is amazing that something commonly known as the Wall served to bring so many walls down. Vietnam Veterans Memorial is a powerful reminder of those people who fought and died serving this country in Vietnam. Our next unsung hero served America in that war. As a matter of fact, he served this country for more than 20 years. But when the United States turned its back on him, he didn't walk away. He didn't quit. Mike Tufariello fought to change America.
When the national anthem is played, few stand as straight or proud as Chief Petty Officer Mike Tufariello. He has served in the Navy for over 20 years, first as a gung-ho 19-year-old who volunteered for combat in Vietnam. Few foot soldiers saw more action in Vietnam than Mike Tufariello. Tufariello signed up for tour after tour of duty, working toward spending his whole adult life in a uniform. His collection of medals and outstanding service records are testimony to an intense love for the military. Later in his career, he was named the Navy's Sailor of the Year, their Top Gun. Almost overnight, a source of pride turned to shame for Mike Tufariello. An act of bravery forced a decorated soldier to become a disgraced and broken man. After 2 tours in Vietnam and several years shore service back in America, Mike earned the rank of Chief Petty Officer and was transferred to the Naval Air Station in Dallas in the payroll department. All seemed to be going well for Tufariello until he discovered blatant examples of financial irregularities. The proper thing, he felt, was to report the payroll problems. Yet when he opened his mouth, his life became a nightmare.
They doctored up the paperwork to show the people were actually there when in fact they weren't. Now, just knowing about this, okay, you have an obligation to do something about it. It's wrong, it's fraud. There's no two ways, there's no nice way of putting it.
After Tufariello obtained proof of the payroll fraud, his disclosure was met by angry resistance by superiors at the Dallas Naval Air Station.
They knew of my reputation for doing things by the book and following regulations to the letter. And they gave me an option, and they said, this is what your option is. You could either A, go along with what's going on and try to do nothing about it and enjoy Dallas, or B, try to correct the situation. And they forewarned me ahead of time that if you try to correct the situation, you're going to bang heads with people like you've never banged heads before.
When Mike joined the Navy, he accepted the possibility of going to war. But he never expected to be at war with his own country. He sought the advice of his one-time immediate supervisor, David Smallwood, who urged Tufariello to pursue his charges of widespread fraud in the military payroll system.
Mike Tufariello not only did his job correctly, on time, but he looked the part. He was, in essence, everything every military individual should aspire to. He knew the books, he knew the Navy, he knew the system, he knew basically what was proper and what was improper.
There was a problem there because they didn't know what to do with me. You know, what they did was they fired me from my position and assigned me to a very mediocre job. Before I was assigned to this new position, they told me to go home on leave, and we're going to arrange a meeting so you can discuss your allegations of fraud with the new base commanding officer and other staff officers. I said, okay, so I went home.
Mike's obsession with following rules and regulations left him tangled in a web of events he calls a nightmare.
I get a phone call from one of my co-workers, well, how is it going, Chief Tuff, you know, and all of this here. And I says, well, she asked me if I had heard when the meeting was going to take place. I said, no, I'm still waiting. Where's the wife? I told her where she went. I said, she goes, well, how do you feel? I says, I'm frustrating, just waiting around, you know, waiting for the phone call to come. I said, I feel like jumping off the Brooklyn Bridge. Now, my immediate supervisor, who was a lieutenant commander, I won't mention his name now because it's irrelevant, he knows who he is, was standing close by, and she says that, yeah, I spoke to Chief Tuff, and he said he felt like jumping off the Brooklyn Bridge. Well, this commander went to the executive officer and says, we got him now. He threatened to commit suicide. The master chief of the base called me up and says,
This is after the cops had left.
this is after the cops had left, okay? He calls me up, how you doing? I says, fine. I says, the meeting set? He said, yes, put your dress uniform on and come on down to the base. I drove down to the base and went up to the master chief's office. He said, just have a seat. I see all of these people walking, all the people who were involved in the little scheme of fraud, who were covering it up. They all walked, and they invited me in. I see these two Marines standing there, and I start talking, and nobody is talking back to me. There's 7 guys in the room, and nobody's talking to me. And they just nod their head, and boom, I'm up and taken away they put me in a car, and we head somewhere north, not telling me where I'm going, you know, what's going on. Just have these 2 Marines, you know.
They said, come with us?
Come with us. No, not come with us. Just grab me by the arms and let's go. This here is what they call the admin building. When I reported on the base, when they told me to come down to the base, this is where I reported. On 20 July 1984, 2 armed guard Marines took me by the arms and escorted me down to over here where the duty vehicle was parked. See the duty vehicle right here? It says duty vehicle. That's where the duty vehicle was parked, and I was placed in the vehicle, and we headed this way somewhere north, and I didn't know where we were going. I'm up and taken away they put me in a car, and we head somewhere north, not telling me where I'm going, you know, what's going on. We drive up, and we finally get to we got to Shepherd Air Force Base, see the big sign. And they asked, well, where's the hospital? That's what they asked the main guy, how we doing going to the hospital, you know, and drove alongside. They escorted me into the hospital. 2 male nurses came down, big mooses, you know, and they grabbed me, and I looked, and they said, just come with us, you know, and put me in the elevator, and up we go, and the elevator door open, and there you go, psychiatric ward. I mean, my legs buckled, like, God, what's going on here? I mean, it's a horror story. I mean, I couldn't believe what was happening.
I left my husband. He was fine. He was either working out in the yard or pumping weights, something. Came home, and I looked on this little chalkboard that I had near my telephone. We'll be home at 6 for dinner. Meeting was set up. Great, Mayor. Okay, so I went ahead, proceeded to do dinner, and I kept looking at the clock, and he hadn't called me. Hadn't heard from him, and that's just not like Mike. He says, I'll be home at 6, he's home at 6. I received a call from the base that evening from, I believe, a chief, and he told me that my husband would not be home that evening. And I said, what do you mean you won't be home that evening? Or this evening? And he says, well, Mike threatened suicide. And I said, excuse me? And he says, no, Mike threatened to blow his brains out or jump off the Brooklyn Bridge. I says, excuse me. I went to Wet n Wild today with my 2 children. If I thought my husband was suicidal, I would never leave my husband. I says, he told me that a meeting was supposed to be set up. He's been waiting for 3 days. I says, well, where is he? Well, we don't know just yet, and I can't tell you that. I'll call you later. And I was laying in bed at 2 in the morning, and my aunt was talking to me and, you know, checking with the kids, and the phone rang. And they said, your husband is in Wichita Falls. Wichita Falls at Shepherd Air Force Base. And I said, why? He said, well, he was going to commit suicide. I said, my husband was not going to commit suicide. I said, he was waiting for this meeting. It was supposed to be set up to discuss this fraud that he had discovered. So they says, well, they had to do this. It had to be this way.
All I heard was, oh, did you hear the chief went nuts? I said, what do you mean? Oh, yeah, your buddy. He went nuts.
If you ever saw the movie One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, I mean, I stood there and I looked. I mean, it was the exact picture. The nurses, male nurses, were in the little glass encasement, steel door, you know, wire mesh windows. I mean, just wow. So I sat down and I propped my feet up, you know, and I happened to look down, that there's happy faces on my slippers. I mean, I could have killed somebody, literally. I mean, I didn't know what to do.
The ultimate humiliation.
Oh, I mean, 1 year before, my wife and I sat at a, like I said, a place in Manhattan where the Navy awarded me a plaque for the Sailor of the Year, and now I'm rewarded with slippers with happy faces on them. I went from one of the Navy's elite to now a full madman.
We asked where was the psychiatric ward, and we went up on the elevator, and the doors open, and there was psychiatric ward. It was so degrading. There he was in those striped pajamas and those slippers, and he just looked at me. I knew he was mad because I came to see him like that. I had looked up to him. Such a strong man. And he just looked at me, and I could see he was so upset. I just looked at him, and I could not believe that they did this to him. It was so uncalled for. And he was not suicidal. I mean, how do you tell a 6- and 7-year-old that their daddy is in a mental ward? It was terrible. And I will never forget it. And every time I think about it, it upsets me immensely. Oh, my heart was broke. My heart was broke for him. For him. I hurt. And I was scared because I really didn't know, how long is he going to be here? What are they going to do to him?
According to a medical report, a hospital doctor released Tufariello, saying the patient's condition appeared to be clinically stable. His prognosis for military life was excellent. Tufariello was sent back to Dallas and branded a crazy man. He was demoted and stripped of most of his duties at the Naval Air Station, but his campaign to clean up the payroll fraud never stopped. The humiliation was like a stain, but he would not give up.
Got back to the house. The next day I went down to the base, and I went to the Master Chief office now, and he seemed kind of surprised to see me so soon. And he stood up and he says, well, you'll be glad to know there's been no formal charges pressed against you. I shut the door, and I grabbed him by the shirt collar, slammed him against the wall, and I said, you son of a bitch. I said, you were supposed to help me out. Instead, you helped them set me up. I guess it was around the 11th of October, 1984. I'm visited by the Force Master Chief, quote unquote, the senior ranking enlisted man in the program. And they says, we've been getting these anonymous letters, and we're pretty sure it's you who's been writing them. I says, yeah, that's right, it is. Tell us what happened. Told them what happened. Showed them what happened. They said, okay, we're going to do an investigation. 24 hours later, they come back into the office, couldn't even look me in the eye, stood right in front of me and said, Chief, you were right. It was fraud. It was a cover-up of fraud. But there's too many people in the upper echelon involved in this thing, so it has to be shuffled under the carpet. I said, you got to be kidding me. He said, that's the way it's got to be. I just totally let down.
Tufariello knew that until the payroll scandal was corrected, his reputation would forever remain tarnished. Tirelessly, he began to write American senators and members of Congress about the irregularities and his suffering. He was met with closed doors from nearly every elected official he contacted.
Between me and Dave Smallwood, we wrote over 400 letters to members of the Congress and Senate. And we did get some replies, and some of the replies that I received, my wife wrote a letter to the White House and Nancy Reagan, and she basically got a form letter saying, sorry about that.
Out of our jurisdiction?
It's out of the White House, it's out of their jurisdiction. I thought the White House and the First Lady and the President of the United States control the entire country, so we pleaded for help directly to the White House, and there was no help there. Phil Graham, one of my senators, another form letter.
Mike Tufariello never wavered in his commitment to helping clean up corruption. His notices fell on deaf ears, and they continued even after his retirement from the Navy. Chief Petty Officer Tufariello was cleared of any psychological problems, but the charges ruined his career. Even though he received a letter of commendation for his whistleblowing from the Secretary of the Navy, none of his commanders were ever disciplined. The Navy ultimately praised Tufariello for reporting the improprieties and vowed to take steps to ward against similar fraud in the future. But the official commendation and the promise to do better next time are small consolation for the years of abuse he had to suffer simply because he refused to close his eyes to the waste of hundreds of thousands of tax dollars. Michael Tufariello still has his medals, but he has been stripped of his military pride. The war veteran fought his toughest battle on a most unlikely front. Here on his home base, against his own people.
I received a letter from the Secretary of the Navy himself, who writes to me and thanks me for having courage, reporting the fraud, waste, and the fraud. He also apologized to me and my family for my frustrating experience. This letter comes 2 weeks after I'm out of the military.
He was imprisoned in a military mental hospital in the United States of America for threatening to tell the truth. And people think it only happens in the Soviet Union, people disappearing, people being branded as deranged. Michael wants to clean up the Navy. That's all he wants to do. He wants to clean up the Navy that we both love. How can you not love an organization that is sworn to protect and defend the very soil we walk upon?
I observed an act of fraud. I reported that fraud. And
You did your duty.
I did my duty, and what happened to me was anyone's nightmare, was a nightmare. When I stand there in uniform now, I represent the good years, the good people, the honest people, the people of integrity. The military is a good, strong organization. I had a good career until I met the bad apples.
Mike Tufariello's story became the symbol for hundreds of other dedicated soldiers and seamen who were retaliated against for blowing the whistle on military misconduct. Civilian life has been a challenge for Tufariello, now a manager at an oil change franchise in North Texas.
We'll tell you to just walk away and forget it.
He has discovered that so many others have suffered similar and shocking hardships.
You take the drugs and we're going to put you in a straitjacket.
Tufariello helped start a nationwide support group. They call themselves the Wounded Eagles.
I mean, I have stacks of correspondence of horror stories, if you would. I mean, people literally, their lives totally destroyed because they came forward with the truth.
Michael tried everything to resolve this issue at its lowest level. And it got worse, and it got worse, and one layer after another of naval leadership all the way up to the top, had betrayed him. I was there. I saw it. I witnessed it. That's why he's a hero, because he did his duty. Please join me now in welcoming the hero who lived among you quietly, sometimes thinking and wondering whether he did the right thing. Ladies and gentlemen, it is with deep respect that I present Michael Tufariello, United States Navy retired.